Okay, so with that, we are going to get down to the first public hearing. We have several tonight. It's a resolution establishing a new user fee schedule for certain city services provided to persons for private benefit. Do we have a staff report on this?
Yes, thank you, Your Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. We started this discussion at our last July 9th council meeting. Since that time, we've expanded the written report to provide you some of the additional information that was requested in that meeting. And then we've also prepared a brief PowerPoint presentation. The objective is to walk you through with a few slides kind of historical context of what basically to kind of bring you up to date from when we last updated our user fees through a comprehensive study in fiscal year 11-12 to the requested action before you tonight. First point of reference would be on September 28th, 2011, we contracted with the firm NBS to provide for a comprehensive user fee study. The results of that study were shared with City Management and City Council in multiple study sessions. That study session, there are a few excerpts on the following slide that I'd like to just kind of recall to your attention. This was originally presented at the April 25th, 2012 study session. The scope of services for that comprehensive user fee examined the full cost of providing user fee services for the following departments. They were community development, building, public works engineering, police, city clerk, and finance. We used the results of that comprehensive study then to update the department's user fees. What was not included in that study were taxes, fines, development impact fees, or any other similar type charges. An important note about that fee study was time estimates were a critical component of the fee study that was completed. Departments met with finance staff and the consultants to provide estimates of time to perform tasks related to the user fees. We also then examined activity and volume data. They looked at historical patterns, looking back sometimes 2 to 3 years if data was available, to provide a basis then for forecasting future activity. Also at that time, we updated with our most recent budget cost data, so the model that was implemented that year reflected the current year cost. Important to note that NBS, through that process as a consultant, had the experience to challenge and to discuss the estimates and the assumptions that were made. One of the key things, and this again is the consultant's slide presentation, but one of the key deliverables of that completed study was that the methodology for calculating the fees was defensible from the standpoint of all of the various components that go into calculating user fees. The extent to which the city could properly then recognize fee for service in accordance with government code as well as Prop 218 was something from the consultant's perspective. They ensured with the integrity of the report and completion of the report that the user fee does do that. The two codes that I just mentioned, the California Government Code 66014A, it states that the fees may not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the fees. So when we talk about cost recovery, or we talk about 100% cost recovery, we are recovering the cost of delivering that particular service. We're not recovering in excess of that. You cannot under a user fee model. And then most importantly, Prop 218 says that you must pair the revenues to the cost. So the fees derived from the charge of the fee should not be used for any other purpose other than which the fee was charged or imposed. All of those things then provide the basis for the adopted fee schedule. Prior to that study, we had last done a comprehensive fee study in the fiscal year 2013. So as a result of the final completion of that, there were also some best practices that were recommended by the consultant. They recommended that we do a comprehensive study every 3 to 5 years. But then secondly, one of their recommendations was that we provide some annual mechanism for an increase to continue to keep our user fees current with our cost. And the mechanism, there are two options, either a CPI adjustment or labor cost adjustment. This slide is meant to illustrate then basically, again, the cost component. How is the fee calculated? It basically takes into consideration the productive hourly rate, and the productive hourly rate is a combination of labor, indirect labor, citywide overhead, and then allocated common cost. All of those things then factor in appropriately to provide a productive hourly rate that then is calculated against the estimated hours to complete the task. When you do that example, then that's how you come up with the cost that is eligible for cost recovery under the user fee methodology. This illustration here then is meant to provide the basis that full cost recovery represents this. If you've got a current fee and then you've got an amount of providing the cost of service that is in excess of that current fee, then anything in excess, in essence, is a subsidy from other city resources. And in most cases, that subsidy is from the city's general fund. So all of those things resulted in that study being completed, and in April of 2012, the resolution for the master fee schedule was adopted. It was a pretty significant increase at that time, again, because it had not been done comprehensively in a number of years. And so as a result of that, there was much discussion, much planning to kind of set the groundwork for that not to have to be repeated again, let's say 10 years from now. So then that brings us to two other actions that occurred. In that following fiscal year, we once again contracted with NBS to review select fees that primarily were in the areas of stormwater operations at the time of adoption, and then when we went to implement the fee structure that was adopted, there were some time estimates that needed to be revised from the standpoint of looking at the scope and the required time of inspections. Some various subcategories were created, and as a result of that study performed by NBS, there were different subcategories of fees that were then added into a revised master fee schedule that was adopted in October of 23 of 2013. In the following fiscal year, then, recalling one of the best practices from the completed study, the City Council revised City Council Policy 3.01, which is the budget and fiscal policy, to allow for the adjustment, annual adjustment related to labor cost. So then that brought us to the discussion on June the 9th, where we proposed then the 1.7% adjustment for labor that is reflected in the 14-15 year budget. We proposed that adjustment then be carried over to the user fee adopted master fee schedule. As a result of all of the discussion that ensued on that particular night, we did revise the report. And the revised report provides you with several columns that are referenced in your agenda report. There's a section where it shows the fees, and it kind of took you back to the study session where we talked about fees in defined categories. We attempted to segregate the fees into defined categories and deal with them from that perspective as to how they might be best implemented. We also provided a column B, which showed the fund impacted from the fee revenue. And then most importantly, one of the questions was the volume of the fees that were experienced in fiscal year 12-13 and 13-14. We've included those two completed volume years for columns C and D. And then the dollar impact of the proposed adjustment, recognizing that a 1.7% can be illustrated as such. We provided you two examples of how the labor cost adjustment is then applied, using this example from the community development planning fee schedule. Fee number one is a tentative track map. It's a rather large fee. $22,773 is the current fee. The 1.7 labor adjustment would bring that proposed fee to a revised amount of $23,160 under the revised fee schedule. A similar 1.7 adjustment on a relatively smaller fee, perhaps news racks. The current fee is $118. With the 1.7% adjustment, then the proposed fee under the revised fee schedule would be $120. That concludes staff comments at this time. Again, the agenda report was revised to provide you with information that was requested as a part of the last discussion. Again, this PowerPoint was meant to illustrate there's two things, and perhaps they don't jump out as much as they should. When we're going through a process and we're revising time estimates, we're looking at any of the things that underscore the methodology of the user fee report. That is not something that staff can do at the staff level. That's why we, in past, in order to maintain the defensibility of the user fee, we've enacted the assistance of trained professionals, consultants in the person of NBS to guide us through that process. So what the suggested action is tonight is, again, keeping with the recommendation. It is simply not to address the methodology, not to change any of those things, but provide a 1.7% adjustment so that we're doing some sort of escalator to keep our fees current with known conditions for this 14-15 year. Again, recall this suggestion, one of the other suggestions was then to look at this and review it every 3 to 5 years. So it was the plan of the Finance Department to then have the comprehensive user fee brought forth as an additional comprehensive study during the next fiscal year. And certainly with that, I will stop and entertain any additional questions that you might have.
Any questions at this particular point? Ronnie, the fee, is it basically for the service, or does it also encompass the amount of time that it takes to provide the service? In other words, let's say if we have to have an inspector go someplace, is it basically the fee for the inspection, or is it based on the amount of time that it takes them to do the inspection?
It's based on the time that it takes them to do the inspection.
Okay.
Your Honor, perhaps I could add a little clarity. It's actually the time required to carry out the service. And in many cases, the inspection isn't the only step in the process to provide the service. The inspector may have to go back and write up a report and file it, for example, with a regulatory agency. That time as well is built into the cost to provide the service.
So in other words, Tom, like let's say if it takes him, 15 minutes actually to physically go out and do the inspection. However, he's got to go back to City Hall here or wherever he is and write up a report and file it. And that, in essence, will take longer, obviously, than what the 10 minutes of the physical inspection took.
That is correct, and that total amount of time is required to provide the service, so that all that time was built into the fee.
Is it typical when they do an inspection, especially if it's a state or a federal mandated one, that they do have to go back and file a report?
Yeah. Well, yes, certainly if it's a mandated inspection, there's almost always a report that has to be filed, as well as ongoing training and other time spent to provide that service.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Mrs. Craven had a question.
Yes, I have a question on, well, there are a couple places you can get to it, but let's go to Big 9, which is Public Works. Or you can, it's bigger if you go to Big 23.
I'd prefer that.
Okay, I would too, because in this light I'm having a hard time reading the small print on the other one. On page Big 23, there's fee number 17, floodplain determination letter. Can you tell me what that is? Now you're going to go back to Big 9.
Ms. Tucker is our floodplain manager, and I could attempt, but I want to make sure you get a fully accurate response, so I asked Ms. Tucker to come up and provide that response.
Yes, Your Honor. Council members, the floodplain determination letter is one that a new development comes in, and if they're planning to do any kind of development in or near floodplain hazard area, then we review their plans and look at how they're incorporated. And in the past, there used to be permits issued for temporary development within the floodplain, knowing that they would remove themselves. But bringing up to current laws, we try to be above and beyond the minimum, federal requirements, and we do not allow development in those flood hazard areas. So it's very rare. I think there's been one in the 20 years that I've been here that we've issued.
Okay, so this isn't a letter we'd be giving people for their insurance companies saying you are no longer in the floodplain?
That's correct. The letters we send out, and we've sent them out from time to time. We'll be sending one out in about 6 months. Those are free. The city pays for the mailing, and staff puts together the letter and all the information.
Okay, I was just wondering if $582 is what it costs to get those letters. They're free.
They're free.
Okay, thank you. My other question, I can't tell you what page, but last time I had asked about several things in Public Works One was a banner permit, and there were some other things, and they're not even here now. So I'm wondering if somebody can tell me what happened to them.
Permits here.
Where, you see it? I thought I read them all. Last time I asked about them because they were on the previous, in the previous packet, but I don't see them here this time. And they don't keep my...
It's under community development.
Yeah, they were last time, too. They were in both places last time, but they're not here under Public Works now.
That was clean up.
Page 20.
Page 7. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
number
they're in-
2.4 on page 20. 2.4,
I don't know whether they're.
install signs and banners, etc. 400 and,
Oh, they are there. I missed them, thank you. Okay. They pay both? That's, I still needed an answer on that one.
Usually it's the plant and community development fee that they pay for banners when they're temporary. Quite honestly, under the Public Works, we didn't add or change that language. That's a carryover. And I believe the intent when it was first written, although we don't have a definition section, so we just have to go on intent and the way we apply it, is let's say somebody wanted to come in and install a banner across a road that required a permanent structure or some kind of construction to support it that would require inspection, then we would charge the Public Works fee, and we quite honestly haven't had requests for that. And if somebody comes in for temporary banners, we don't charge a fee or provide a permit for that in Public Works.
Okay, so that's just pretty much an inspection? or-
Yeah, because it's under the item that really deals with permanent sign installations. So in the case where it may not be a metal sign, it could be a banner that's permanent. That's really what was intended.
Okay.
And at
thank-
least if not intended, that's the way we're applying the fee.
Okay, thank you.
can we continue with that item just a not on you, Tom, but on 2.4, page 20, it talks about banners. $450 for a banner to be displayed for a certain period of time?
No, that's just what we were describing is the difference between, say, a temporary banner that's displayed for a limited period of time. That would be under the permit section that
Okay, I
community
got you.
development administers. The one under Public Works would be for a permanent installation.
I've got a question.
Okay, Mr. Little?
Yeah, could you explain why you have a fee for grading permit inspection? I'm looking at the small print.
What's the page number?
Page 9, under 12.1, from 1,001 cubic yards up to 10,000 cubic yards, which seems to me a very large range, and you charge $6,035. Recommended is $61.38. Seems like the guy that's going to have 1,000 or 1,500 cubic yards is paying a real premium for the permit or for the inspection, and the guy that's got the 10,000 cubic yards or close to it is getting it done for a lot less.
I can give a general response to this, but quite honestly, we have a lot of fees here, and there's a lot of detail that goes into each one of these, and to be able to just kind of off the top of my head recall all of this in this kind of setting is difficult, and most of this isn't an analysis we did for this item tonight. It's the way it was structured previously with the fee program. And so, I'll give a general response, but I probably won't be the level of detail you're looking for. And I'm really not sure this was the format tonight that we were looking to go fee by fee and give you a justification of how it was developed, particularly when it's something that was a category developed a long time ago, and we just carried it forward with updated costs. So if you look in here, and I'll maybe even expand it to a more general conversation, if you look in a lot of cases, we have from 0 to infinity is a range, and you can't possibly administer a unit-by-unit fee unless you start going to a sliding scale where we have to monitor all of our time. If we're going to do that, we need to hire more staff just to monitor and record and calculate all of our time. So instead, to make it more easily administered, we've broken it into categories. And again, those are categories that were developed a long time ago and have been consistently used at the city. We didn't rethink those, it was the cost. So this is one of those areas where we have categories, and I'm just looking at the way the categories broken out, I can only imagine that the way it was originally developed is that the amount of work, whether it's 1 yard or 10,000 yards, we have to look at a haul route. We have a lot of administrative work that goes into even hauling that 1 yard just to track where it's coming and going and making sure it's the trucks are going to use a reasonable route. Once you start adding more material, eventually as it goes up over 10,000, then you might get into other issues, and that's probably why 10,000 was a break point. But there's a lot of administrative work that's about the same effort, whether it's 1 unit or 1,000 units or 10,000 units. So that's why you see that initial cost for the first 10,000 units being higher, and then each 10,000 after that being a lower dollar amount for each 10,000 increment. Again, it's the upfront cost. So that's, again, about as detailed as I can get without more of what I would call a study session level of analysis, which really isn't what we were prepared to do tonight.
I can give a little. In my business, I'm a retailer, and oftentimes I pay a small service charge because it takes them just as much time to ship and box one shirt as it does 100. The time that it takes is relatively about the same. So obviously if I order 100, I'll probably get a little bit better deal. If I only order one, they will not only charge me the service charge, which sometimes could be up into $10, but also the shipping charges too. So that could be part of it as well.
Yeah.
Mr. Morgan?
I think the last time we brought this up, we picked out about 5 or 6 to look at and do kind of I call it a time motion study of those 5 or 6, so we can actually see the steps you go through. I didn't mean pick out at random all these. No. We picked out a few. One in particular was we had 25 houses to 5 to 25, and you had the same rate you had to pay as far as subdivision. I think it was 5 to 25 or 25 to 76, but you're charging the same thing for the 25 as you are for the 1 or for the 5. And so that was one of those we asked about, just to kind of say, what steps do you do to figure that out? And it's not just yours. I also asked about the Sheriff's Department on how you calculated the $182 for an overnight vehicle, released, because that gets kind of expensive, especially if somebody can't afford it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and again, rather than try and get into a detailed analysis of how each of these fee categories were developed, what you're asking for is something that this item isn't intending to address tonight that's before you. What's before you tonight was simply a look at what the cost of inflation was and apply that to the fees. What you're asking for with time and motion studies and that level of analysis is really what the consultant was hired to do when the fees were developed, is to take our original fee categories and evolve them into an updated fee that captures more of the true costs. If you're asking for answers to that kind of analysis, then you're asking for really what I think Ronnie was alluding to, and that is in our next update to the fees, where we hire the consultant again to update it next fiscal year. That's when that would be the time to do that level of analysis. So to sit here tonight and try and go fee by fee and say whether it's 5 to 25 units is the right category or 5 to 20 units, and define
Graduated as it gets higher.
Yeah, and to try and redefine that
Yes.
under this item before you tonight is really not. We're not prepared to do that. So what we have before you tonight is a recommendation to really adjust the fees to account for inflation. If you're asking for a more detailed review with you, then I think the council could make a motion to consider that with the next fee update.
Anything
And
else,
we
Mike?
ask for certain ones. You don't need the whole thing. That's a lot of money, a lot of cost. But pick out some that might be questionable. Maybe I've got one, maybe someone else has got one. They'd like to say, how'd you do that?
Your Honor, I'm sorry, but it seems to me that we had all of that when we got the study. So
Last year.
maybe you need to provide them copies of the study again and
They didn't.
have them have you gone and looked it up?
they didn't justify 5 to 25. That just says same fee, period.
In the
And it should
in
be
the
a
study,
graduated
though?
fee as you get larger numbers. It should be a graduated fee, not the same guy doing 5 lots as 25 lots paying the same thing.
The written report provides discussion on the methodology underlying the fees. When we went through the study session, all of these fees were reviewed, and we did have discussions kind of as to the gradation and where the break points were. So all of that is, as Mr. Fox indicated, that is a study, and that's what I was attempting to say as well in my opening presentations. That is a study. That is something that staff is not, it's not that we're not prepared to do. We don't have the expertise to do that. When you get into the whole defensibility of the methodology that underscores the user fee, that's when we do need the services of NBS or similar consultants to perform that type of analysis. So certainly if there are fees that you'd like us to look at the next time we do the refresh to the user fees, certainly let us know that, and we will make sure that we have adequate discussion about that again, but that is a part of that particular process.
And
I
I
think
get-
Charlotte had a question. Did you want to?
Well, I think Jan's not.
Oh, I just want to finish this. It seems to me that if you have a specific one now, we ought to be able to go back to the study that was just done last year. I can't imagine that much has changed as far as the methodology and how you do it. And the answer should be in that report from last year. If there's only 3 or 4 of them that they, are needing to understand, I would think we could just go back and pick that up.
Jan,
rather
what he's
than-
saying is they didn't break it out in that kind of category where they broke it down like a time and motion study to how much, like 5 to 25. That wasn't set down how they came to that conclusion.
I believe it was, if I'm remembering. Is Mr. Count? I don't have my glasses on. Are you shaking your head? Yes.
There is a much more detailed analysis in the written report, so we can recirculate that again. We're taking notes of the fees that you're discussing again tonight, so certainly that information is available. It's a part of the defensible adopted fee schedule that's presently in place right now.
Right.
So it's not just as simple as, and I don't mean to kind of take your comments out of context. It's not simply just looking at time and motion. There are so many other factors that, quite honestly, we're not knowledgeable of all of the different things that underscore the methodology of the user fee. And the consultant is the one that has all of those complex work papers. And if you change this particular estimate, it's not just time, it's also the other cost, indirect costs that are also a part of that underlying fee and the acceptable level of those costs that then create this adopted fee schedule that we have. So it's not just a simple change one number and that's the bottom line.
So, Your Honor,
Yep.
so next time we have our consultant come through, we can say, why didn't you do a graduated fee on something like this so it's equally cost, not one guy's going to 25, is going to spread his cost, then the guy's doing 5 lots. That doesn't seem fair. You're going to charge the guy the same amount of money. We can ask questions like that of the consultant next time, correct?
Yes.
And why we couldn't do a graduated fee, so it's fair. Okay.
I've got
Mr. Little
yeah,
had a
I've got a question there, maybe some comments at that point in time. But Ronnie, you mentioned indirect cost. I don't see anything. I can't find anything in here that talks about what those indirect costs consist of, what they are, what percentage of the direct costs they may be, and how they are calculated.
The written report, again, details that quite detailed as far as what direct costs are. It defines those. It talks about our category of cost that then are collapsed into...
You're talking
what
about
is
the consultant's report?
the consultant's report, correct? The one.
Well, all that occurred before I got on the council. so-
Last October, we adopted it.
Well,
You
we
were here.
revised it last. We revised it last October, and I do believe you were provided a copy of the original report as well. But again, both of those published documents are available, and they do provide that level of detail.
And we can next time question the consultant about how he came to those conclusions on certain things that aren't clear.
Any other questions at this time? All right, this is an advertised public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing. I do have one card from Matthew Lorimer. Matthew's here. Let me make sure the microphone's on. Yeah, it is, Matt. Okay. 3 minutes, if you would, Matt. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was quite interesting. You're going to increase taxes on people in the city, and you don't understand how the methodology works. But you did a study last year that you should look back on, but you don't have questions on it. Let's just be honest. You have $46 million in reserve. Let me remind some of the people, in 2012, a variance used to be $1,500. It's now $45.35. You're going to raise it another $65. That's $4,600. Let me also remind you, you have 139 employees. Thousand Oaks has 560. Some of your costs are pretty close to Thousand Oaks fees. How do you justify that? Let's talk about a film fee. If you want to shoot a film in Camarillo, it costs $378 for permit. So you should go to Thousand Oaks because it's only $240. Some of these fees are outrageous. The idea that you don't understand the staff, it's pretty simple. Did you hire more employees, your labor? Is your electricity bill higher? It's pretty common sense. The idea that your staff here can't answer your questions and you're going to vote on an increase for the public when you have $46 million in reserves, that's outrageous. How do you even vote for that? Well, we don't really understand the metrics of it. Well, the metrics is you came here. Two weeks ago, your city council ordered you guys to come and have the answers. You should have an understanding, a basic understanding of how things work. Okay, I have an automobile. It runs on gasoline, and I have to have oil in the engine. Also, it takes air. The idea that you're going to raise fees again on business owners that are struggling. Let me remind you, July 1st, they received a $1 increase. Okay, and they're going to receive another $1 increase. Businesses are having a tough time, especially small businesses. Camarillo, your fees have gone outrageous. In 2012, you look at some of these fees. Let's take a lot line adjustment. It used to be $450 in 2012. It's now $1,670. The idea that you're going to raise fees tonight and your own committee here can't even answer your questions. Bill made valid arguments. How do you justify any increase if you can't mitigate why you want an increase? I don't care if it's 1%, 4%. You have $46 million in reserves. There are people suffering. And by the way, you have a lot of empty commercial property around this area. And you know why? For the size of the city, 66,000. And I know Jan's going to say it's for personal enrichment. You know something? You have to have hired staff. Let me remind you, in 2009, I didn't see a reduction in hours when there was less business at City Hall. I didn't see that reduction. Where was the reduction? So I'm just saying to you, I don't think you need to increase taxes, and you need to explain it to the voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, anybody else? I do not have any blue cards to come forward here. Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. And staff, do you have any responses before we get into a dialogue up here on the dais? Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this?
Let me just offer this as a final comment. Again, how the fee is comprised. Direct labor, indirect labor, citywide overhead, allocated common costs come up with a total cost. That total cost then divided by the productive hourly rate, that means the time that is spent performing that user fee, then calculates into the basis for the user fee. The comment was made, how could our user fees be similar to Thousand Oaks, a city that's much larger than ours? It's because when you look at the components of what it costs to deliver that particular fee, and the fees are similar, then the cost would be relatively close. This is meant to reflect our current labor cost. If you will recall, in 12-13, we did do a targeted 6% reduction, so as a result of that, our payroll costs were brought down. This is reflected in that model. This model is attempting to reflect latest year-over-year changes in your current labor cost, one of the components, and it's just one of the components that underscores the user fees. So certainly from this perspective, from the consultant perspective, this was the best methodology then to keep your fees current with your current economic environment.
And Your Honor and council members, if I could also add to Ronnie's comments, user fees is really the operative term, because this is for users that are using a service that the rest of the community is not using. We are recovering, and it's a policy decision, we're recovering 100%, not of all of our costs and expenditures, but of the costs associated with specific user services. If we don't recover those fees or costs 100%, then the slide that Ronnie had up on the screen, any amount less than 100%, the general community will be subsidizing that user fee that they are not using. And that's a policy call. And it can go either way. But there's a whole bunch of folks, I would imagine, that would rather see a specialty service being paid for by that specific user at their discretion. They're using that service rather than laying that fee off to the rest of the community that does not use that service. It's a policy call.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. All right, Mr. Little.
Well, I voted against these fee increases since I've been on the council. I plan to do that again. My argument is that we require, in order for us to be a proper government and responsible government, we require people to report to us on things that we feel are necessary, that we look at to make sure that they're done correctly and in a safe manner. And that's our requirement. And then in turn, we're supposed to then say, well, because of that, because you've asked for this service, we're going to charge you 100% of the cost. So I just think that there's some need to consider that these fees are, and I'm not, by the way, not talking about development fees. I'm talking about regulatory fees. And so I just don't believe that we should try to recover 100% of the cost.
Your Honor.
Mrs. Craven.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Little stated my case precisely, but I'm on the other side because I believe that if you as an individual or if you have a company that is going to benefit from a service that we provide, whether we require you to avail yourself of this or whether it's discretionary, then I believe that you should pay for that service and that the rest of the people who live in Camarillo should not be subsidizing it. I believe if you benefit from it, you pay for it. However, I do say that in some instances, and if you look carefully here, there are some that are greatly reduced. Those are to individual homeowners, and we want the homeowners to go ahead and avail themselves of these services because there is a public benefit, and if they don't, there could be a big problem for the general public. For those services, I support going ahead and reducing the fee so that the permit holders would go ahead and apply for it, or the people would apply for whatever permit or whatever use we're going to charge a fee for, instead of just trying to do it under the counter, so to speak, under the table. So I can support this.
Mrs. McDonald.
I have a few things. First of all, this is a fee, not a tax, to the general public, and I think Mrs. Craven said it very well. These are fees that are applied to someone for a specific purpose. We talked about it last time. You had Charlotte's Cookies, and I said I should not be paying the fees for you to operate Charlotte's Cookies, and I don't think the general...
I want to have cupcakes this week.
Oh, okay. And the general public probably shouldn't be paying the fee for my neighbors to put in their swimming pool. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that swimming pool is done right so that it isn't a detriment to the neighborhood. So that the people who choose to use these services are the ones that are paying for it, and it's not this general tax. Speaking to the study, we paid a consultant. They painstakingly went through all of these steps with the staff that was trying to accomplish this task, whether it was more than one person or not. What did it cost? And it was, I don't remember, it was a pretty good sized report. So to say we don't understand it, we do understand it. And when we were done with implementing that, and it was many years since the time that we had adjusted it to get everything in line as best we could, the decision was made that in order to not get so far out of whack that we would just each time just adjust it to recover the increase in labor costs, because that was the piece that would change more. So to stand up and say that we don't understand what we're doing, and I'm sorry, it was a very lengthy report, and it's there for anybody to come in and look at. It is public record. There are some fees here that the council made that policy decision on. Most of those are at 33% recovery on the ones for the small permits, put in a dishwasher or a patio cover, those kind of things, because again, we want compliance. Those are there. They're very clear in this report.
I think the most important thing is that we try to be open and honest, and to try to make it into some inflammatory thing is just unfair to us and unfair to the general public. And if there are questions on specific ones, we will address it again. It's coming back up. Personally, when we talk about someone who's been arrested for a DUI and they have to pay $182 to get their car out of impound, I don't think the general public should be subsidizing that. That's my personal opinion. That's probably the least of their worries with the $10,000 it costs when you get arrested for a DUI. So I think you have to set a standard. You have to set a methodology. We know what the methodology is. It's been explained many times, and we do our best to be fair. And I think by having a fee schedule that is tied to the specific service that is for a specific purpose by a specific individual or company is the best way of being fair to the general taxpayers. And that's my 2 cents for that one.
Anyone else?
Your Honor,
Morgan?
the reason I've had some trouble with this is because I believe in recovering 100% of the cost. In some cases, like it was mentioned, on the special user, small user fee type stuff, getting a reduction of some type. But I only asked for 2 things last time, and that was justifying this 5 to 25, because if that were not proven, there's some others I want to look at. But I want an example of one we could look at and say, how did you justify going 5 to 25 and spending the same thing? Say it's $26,000. The guy does 5, gets $26,000 also. I just want to know 1 or 2 examples is all I wanted, and to see what happens, because maybe that 182 seems like a lot, not much to you, on someone gets stopped and without, not drunk driving, but just driving without their license. Okay, car is taken, cost them $182 next morning to get their car. Well, what was our real time on that piece of overnight stay? What was the cost actually? And that's just a minor thing. It may have been, maybe it cost $70 actually total, but that's not the point. The point is, if I see 2 of them that aren't looking correct, I'd like to look at some more next time and see where we go. I didn't get my answers because, I mean, I know we had that study and all that, but they didn't give us those answers either on about 5 to 25. How they came up with that conclusion that it stayed the same, not a graduated cost. So I don't think that I can support this tonight without having something come back and tell me why. I just want a couple examples proven, that's all.
Your Honor, could I ask the police chief to explain what happens when you have your car impounded and why it costs $182?
Sure, would you like to come down?
I asked that earlier.
Well, we got the chief here. Let him.
Yep.
Nothing like putting you on the spot, but.
Mayor,
Welcome.
council people. The California Vehicle Code 22850.5 allows us to recover the administrative cost.
Right.
There's 3 that were spoken about, and I'm going to have to correct you. It's not if you're caught without your driver's license, but if you're caught driving and you're unlicensed,
Right.
and there's a difference with that. But we have the 3, which is the unlicensed driver, you don't have a driver's license, DUI, and then the suspended license. And what's factored into that is the removal, the impound, the storage, and the time it takes to release the vehicle. So if you look at one of those 3 cases, there's a lot of work that has to go into that prior to that vehicle being removed. And there's administrative work that goes along with it, the reports that have to be filled out, and then all the way up through the release. So easily you could have a number of hours that you're going to work on one of those vehicles that's being removed. It's not only the report writing time, but it's the time at the scene that you would be waiting for the tow truck. It's all the paperwork processing time, which is above and beyond just a regular impound. So, and if you look at, historically, you look at a number of cities around the county, our fee is actually quite less than some of our neighboring communities.
The report writing time is actually going to be done anyway because it says drunk driving. You're going to do the report regardless if you had a car or not. Walking drunk could be a report. So what we're talking about is the impound charges, the time waiting for the trucks to get there, that kind of thing, correct?
Well, as far as I know, it's all the administrative time.
That's
so
what I'm asking
anything that's related to that stop, to that impound, to that storage and removal, and then ultimately the release.
So writing up the report for the drunk driving, will be counted against the report or seizing the car, car's card
Not
charges.
having looked at the specific methodology, I would assume that that's administrative time.
See, that's what I was asking for before. I'd like to know where that methodology was and how it was allocated. Because if you had someone you're arresting anyway, you're going to write a report. That's just the time it's going to happen because of the case. But the impounding of the car, that's where I want to find out where the time consumed, what time consumed to cost $182.
Let me add this comment, and perhaps the sheriff could correct me on this one as well. Certain fees in the police department fee schedule, it depends on the staff also that is having to touch that fee, if you will. There's a different level for his cadet. There's a different level for lower level staff as opposed to upper level staff when you get into the administrative costs. That's where the variableness is, and it is that direct labor that then would influence the fee. If a fee has to be touched and signed off by perhaps the sheriff or the deputy, that would have a higher component attached to it than something that could be done at an administrative level much lower.
Sure. You know, if we have a vehicle that's impounded by one of our cadets, their hourly rate is significantly different than a sworn officer.
Well, I just say it won't raise above a sergeant on arrests like that. That just won't happen. He won't go to the captain to look at all the paperwork on that arrest.
Well, again, not being here when the methodology was developed, I don't exactly know what salaries and benefits were factored into that methodology. I don't know what level they rose to.
That was just the one of the minor ones I asked to see what it would look like, and if we did a step-by-step kind of thing.
But there is what I would like to reiterate is that the California Vehicle Code allows for lots of elements to come into play when we want to impound a vehicle, especially for a DUI or suspended license or an unlicensed
I understand that, but I was just looking for the true cost, that's all. Step-by-step cost. Anyway, that's, I got it.
Sorry I put you on the spot, but...
All right, anyone else? Just a couple of comments here that I know a lot has been said, but you know, how you define fees is always interesting, but I do think that we ought to be able to get cost recovery on our fees. And the fee is that obviously, like it was stated, that if it benefits you, you pay the fee, and it's not subsidized by anybody else, not unlike our cable bill. I mean, we got about 400 channels that we see on our cable bill, and at least if you're anything like me, you watch about 10 of them. So there's about 390 of them that I never watch, but technically I'm paying for them. Well, the fee is a little bit different. If you need the service, you pay for it. So it's actually much more defensible than a lot of other items. I do think that staff has done a good job on this. We did hire the consultant. You know, we have the equation on how we decipher these fees. One of the issues here, we haven't done it in 10 years, and that's one of the issues here too. So the world was really different 10 years ago than it is today. So I think they've done a good job here. You know, we're going to revisit this next year and a half, and we'll be able to, make some adjustments in. And, it looks to me like, this is a situation where there's always adjustments that are going to have to make. But I think staff has done a good job on this, and I can certainly support it.
I move to adopt a resolution adopting the master fee schedule for fees and charges.
I'll second that.
There's a motion and second and further discussion. If not, please vote. That passes 3-2 with Vice Mayor Little and Councilmember Morgan opposing. Okay, so that gets us down to another public hearing. It's a resolution initiating the proceedings for Annexation 112 and introduction of an ordinance pre-zoning for change of zone 320 Crestview Ranch. And my understanding is that we can do both of these simultaneously, so that the other one that will tag on to this is the resolution approving the tentative tract map 5920 Crestview Ranch. Do we have a staff report on this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The presentation, once we get the computer up and running again, will be presented by Mr. Bob Burrow.
All right. Backed by popular demand.
It looks like Bob, but much younger.
You look there?
Yeah.
Does look more rested.
Okay.
Good evening, Your Honor, members of the City Council. I've been asked to work on this project with regard to the pre-zoning and the annexation, and if it's okay with the Council, I'd also like to include the tract map part of that as well. And when you have the hearing, you could open a hearing on both of the applications for the annexation pre-zoning and the subdivision map. With regard to the application, you may recall that you did get a request to consider whether or not to allow for the consideration of an annexation. And the property involves a roughly 19.15 acre parcel at 275 Crestview Avenue. It's in the Las Postas Estates area portion of the city of Camarillo, and it's currently improved with one residence, and about 8.5 acres out of the 19 acres is utilized for an aging orchard. The general plan designates the entire property for rural density residential at a maximum of 2.5 units per acre. The proposed pre-zoning would be to annex the property into the city. It's not only the city, but the Camarillo Sanitary District and the detachment from two county service areas. So therefore, we have a reorganization application. And the proposed pre-zoning would be for the rural exclusive 1 acre minimum size parcel. That would be consistent with the areas generally in proximity to the south and to the west, including Spanish Hills and other rural areas. When the City Council did direct that this could be studied, at your request and also the request of LAFCO, we surveyed an additional 17 property owners just to the east along Avocado Place. And we wanted to see whether or not they would like to be included. LAFCO has a policy that to avoid things such as peninsulas of either incorporated or unincorporated areas, and the City Council wanted just to make sure whether or not we could have a little bit more rounded boundary. We sent out letters to each of about 17 properties there to survey their interest. We received a majority of the letters back, but not a single property owner adjacent to the area desired to participate in the annexation. So we are proceeding with the 19.15 acre parcel at the request of the property owner. The applications were filed by David Hassan, representing the Crestview Ranch property. And one of the things I did want to mention that while the area is immediately adjacent to Spanish Hills, we did previously ask this particular property owner whether or not they wanted to be included at that time. And while they weren't interested in being included when parts of Spanish Hills were being annexed, they did participate with regard to things such as roadway improvements, utility lines, including water and drainage and such. So as we get to some of the site characteristics, we can talk about how that interface exists as well. So actually, this was the Planning Commission one, but it'll work. There are just a couple of minor differences. Oops. See, that's the one right adjacent to it that says CC meeting. So another part of the application is that all of the applications were considered concurrently through the environmental review process. Thank you. And there were a number of issues that were considered: biology, water, drainage, geology, and various things. Through the use of modifications to the design, through additional studies in terms of things such as the biology report, areas that weren't going to be incorporated into the grading, there were various mitigation measures which were identified as potential in order to reduce the impacts, projected impacts, to those levels below levels of significance. So a mitigated negative declaration was prepared, and you have received a copy of that. It's not only the initial study, it also includes, by reference and in the appendix, the various studies such as the biology report and some other things. That document was circulated for review. We received several comments, and the responses to those comments were made. Again, we've got the annexation A112 for the reorganization, the changes zone, the track map, and one other application that's not before you this evening, but however, this project is subject to Measure A for a requirement of having development allotments. An application has been filed, and when we get to the 2015 review cycle, you'll see this as one of the applications that have requested allotments in this cycle. And just to let you know, at this point in time, preliminarily, the project does appear to qualify through the point assignments so that it could be considered for allocations. The property, as I indicated, is at 275 Crestview. It's on the north side of Crestview Avenue, on the south side of Corte Carita, right along here, and west of Avocado Place, and immediately adjacent to areas within the Spanish Hills, Ashdale, and other tract. It's one of the remaining large parcels that were created with the Las Posas estates that hadn't been further subdivided within the area as of yet. The area is within the city's sphere of influence and is completely within the urban boundaries for CURB. And again, annexation is being considered in order to obtain city services consistent with the guidelines for orderly development. We touched upon some of the existing conditions again, and noting that about 8.5 acres are in an aging orchard. The city has a threshold of a minimum of 10 acres of agriculture before it would be considered a potentially significant impact. And a large portion of the area along the east side is in a barranca area, and when we get to the track map, you'll see that they've actually set any development outside of that area, in addition to setting grading away from that area, so that it could be preserved both for minimizing impact on grading, providing for the proper water conveyance, and also that any potential biological resources would not be touched as a part of the project. Here's an aerial that looks down on the property. You'll see that there is one residence that exists on the property, and then that barranca area runs along here, and then most of the orchard in citrus is running along here. There's also a smaller area of eucalyptus trees in a grove at the west end there. And as we zoom a little bit closer in, you can see the property. This is Corte Carita here, and one of the fairways within Spanish Hills, and then the Las Posas Estates area here, and then some of the other developments to the south there. This is probably the one other area that remains as a smaller orchard within the area. Again, the general plan does designate the property for rural density residential, so the application would be consistent with that. Here's a couple photos, the entrance to the existing residence along Crestview, both for the main entrance and for a secondary entrance. And then pictures of some of the orchard conditions there, and a portion of that eucalyptus grove area. The existing single-story residence is proposed to be retained on one of the 13 parcels. And we've kind of talked about the negative declaration. Again, through the use of the studies and design modifications, all of the things that might have risen as potentially significant were reduced to less than significance. There's also a mitigation monitoring plan, and the document is available. You would be asked to consider approval of the mitigated negative declaration prior to taking any action on the tract map annexation or change of zone. We've touched on some of these things with regard to the fact that it currently is unincorporated, and it's adjacent to the city limits on two sides. It is a proposed reorganization fully within the city's sphere of influence. The area To the east, this is where the 17 properties that we did survey, and again, at your request and also of LAFCO's request, there was not concurrence to allow for that to be considered. So if the annexation is initiated and filed with LAFCO, we would indicate that there was an attempt made at that, but there was not any willingness for additional properties. It only narrows this peninsula, if you will, of unincorporated areas at this point there. And we have been in contact with LAFCO staff, and while they would rather have the properties included, the policy is that you make an effort at that. Oh, let me go back to one thing. You can't really see here, but just to recall when Crestview came and it curved in that S-curve and terminated in a cul-de-sac there, this was the end of the road there long before the Spanish Hills area was developed here. And again, with Corte Carreta here being one of the newer streets, the property owner did participate in allowing for on-site grading to allow for that street to be accomplished, and then also for water conveyance. There was grading up in here, and then some other utilities. So while they weren't comfortable previously in considering annexation, the indications are that they do feel that now is the time that they'd like to proceed with some sort of development on there. We've talked about the pre-zoning. The LAFCO process. The city is required to first consider the request and to establish a pre-zoning and to initiate the reorganization. LAFCO also does require that the actual entitlement application be considered as well, so that when they're considering the annexation, the justification for even allowing it to be annexed to a city, they want to kind of know what it all entails, the degree of intensity and all those kinds of things. So in accordance with their policy, that's why the track map is also before you at the same time. There are 13 parcels being proposed. Each lot contains a minimum of 1 acre. The easterly portion, we'll show you the track map on that in just a moment, is proposed to be remained undeveloped, and there's a requirement for an agreement that says that it would remain without development. There can certainly be tending of the property there, both either for making sure that there's not further erosion or use of the property, but no structures would be able to be allowed in that area. You couldn't grade pads in that. So that's for a couple of reasons, just to provide a proper buffer between the proposed development and the existing homes to the east, and then also to avoid any potential impact on potential biological resources. The tract map does have recommended conditions, and development allotments would be required. This is the proposed tentative tract map, and there are proposed lots along Crestview here. There's 1, 2, 3, and this fourth one here, it would be the lot for the existing residents, and then there'd be another access to this lot here on this easterly knoll. This area here is that Barranca area that runs along here, and you can see this line here, which would define the area that this would be preserved without development. And then through the review process with the soils report, the grading that had initially been proposed for this area here has actually been pulled back, so they're not going to touch that. So that the separation there has even been more significantly increased. This street along here, it is proposed that there be lots that would have frontage, very similar to the lots on the other side of Corte Carreta. However, they would be more of an elevated position rather than the homes that are on the south or the north side here, where they're in a lower area representing the hillside area there. Then there's also this area here that I've talked about in terms of some of the eucalyptus area there that's going to be partially preserved because of potential butterfly habitat there. And any other grading or tree removal does have to can only be accomplished after a further review by a biologist, so that it's not going to create an impact on certain potential species as well. But you can see that each of the lots would be a full acre. There are some slopes that would run between the lots on Corte Carita and the lots on Crestview. Otherwise, the lots would be generally flat. There is the requirement that these parcels along here have, that you can't just back out into Crestview. One of the requirements is either to have a circular driveway or come in and have a turnaround area on the lot. So the project has gone through the full review by the other departments and so forth, and the Planning Commission did consider all of the applications, and the applications do come forward with a recommendation to you for their approval. So your consideration would be that you would conduct a public hearing, and again, we would suggest that you perhaps open the public hearing on the annexation, pre-zoning, and track map all at one time, so testimony could take place on all of those concurrently, because some of the issues do overlap between those applications. And then if you do find that the applications are worthy to consider for approval, you'd be required to approve the mitigated negative declaration, then to adopt a resolution initiating the annexation, introduce an ordinance for the proposed pre-zoning to the RE 1 acre minimum parcel size zone, and then to approve track 5920. If all of those actions are undertaken, then staff would prepare the application to be submitted to LAFCO, where there'd be another hearing on just the annexation part. So with that, if there's any particular questions, I'd be happy to try to address those.
I have a question. Let me just start off here, if you would. Bob, I understand they're 1 acre sites. Is that about correct, about 1 acre? Is that contiguous with the rest of the homes up there?
Yes.
That's
yes.
contiguous.
All of the lots on Spanish Hills, and there is not a residential plan development permit for this. These would either be custom homes or lot sales program type of a thing.
Typically, Bob, what would the size of a custom home be on a 1 acre? What would that be?
Within Spanish Hills, they're 4,000 to 5,000 square foot.
Mm-hmm. Right around there?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, a couple, 3 things. Is there water wells on this property, or a water well on this property?
I don't believe there's a water well. They currently do own shares in the Crestview Mutual Service Area, and they do have a will serve letter from Crestview. While with regard to that, then they would have to conform with the requirements for further service in terms of water extensions, and then whatever their requirements are with regard to use and billing of water, just like portions of Spanish Hills as well.
In Crestview's water, of course, expansion of their
Crestview
lines, would they then close or discontinue use of that well or wells?
I know that there was a well down by the S curve there that Crestview operates, but I don't believe there's actually any on the property per se.
Okay, so Crestview took the well for. Okay.
Yeah, they do use Crestview Mutual to irrigate the existing orchards currently.
Okay, I guess I should be talking to Mr. Atzinger. He'll know for sure. Next, the barranca at the end, at the east end, next to Mr. Atzinger's property there. He made a suggestion in reading back into the Planning Commission's comments that he would be willing to, because he wants to keep it that way, make sure it doesn't go sideways on him if the other property lets it go or other things happen, that he would like to offer keeping that part of the barranca up. Is that ever discussed or gone to where agreement could be made where he could be the person that, if no one's going to take care of that barranca, he does?
The conditions require that within this area here, the east end of that they actually deed over the development rights. But it does allow for any other private agreements in terms of the proper maintenance of that, and then, of course, any issues with regard to either erosion of that or other forces that cause any other issues with regard to that slope, that's a private property matter between the two properties.
So it'd be an agreement between the two property owners. There would be nothing else that would keep them from doing that. So there's no public...
There's nothing that would prohibit that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Little?
Follow-up question on that. Who owns that? You said it would be deeded over, this open space, barranca. Who is going to be the owner of it?
The transfer development rights would be to the city, so we would have control.
So the city would end up owning that piece of property?
Only the
only the-
only the development rights.
Well, then who would physically own it?
This property, the two properties to the
Present owner or the
they would
owner?
own fee title, but there would be like an easement in favor of the city. We did check with the Parks District. They had no interest in either doing trails or other things such as that. But the city's done that in a couple of other instances where, for whatever reason, they couldn't build on that, and the development rights only were transferred to the city by agreement.
That makes me follow more. If the city has the rights, development rights to that area, and someone did want to make sure it's maintained in a fashion that's safe, then Mr. Atzinger could do that, or would he have to come and ask us to use that property?
Only if they were proposing to build structures.
No.
But if
I'm
they are
talking about
going to be doing something in terms of slope restoration or slope
Yes.
maintenance, that would not.
He could do that on his own.
Whoever had the interest, either the fee title or an easement for that purpose, could do that, and would be responsible for doing that.
But wait.
But without
Fee title. Who has the fee title of that Barranca?
this lot here and that lot here.
So let's go back again. That means you have to go back to those people who own that fee, those areas to be able to go and keep it up. If you're another person outside of
Yeah,
that.
that would be, somebody can't go onto your property and do maintenance without permission. That permission could either be on a one-time basis or on a perpetual easement type of situation.
I think Mr. Little had.
Yeah, I was going to follow up on, so the owner who now owns the full amount of property will have part of that ownership. Is that what I understand? He will have fee title to that Barranca.
Whoever ultimately owns the lot would have the fee title to.
Which is where the current house is?
Actually, there's a lot down here, and then the existing ranch house would be on this parcel here.
Oh, okay. So when the new house is built on that new lot, or those two new lots, they will acquire the fee title to the whole Barranca. Is that what I
Yes.
understand?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the city has the development rights to that. But the maintenance and any maintenance that would be subject to somebody else.
The city would have the control to say whether or not any structures could be built.
Right.
Only.
Okay.
Any other issues with regard to grading, or if they wanted to turn it into an orchard, that's entirely up to the property owner.
Now, the other question I had, I assume, is that the sewer service will be provided by the Camarillo Sanitation District?
Yes, part of the reorganization is to annex to the city.
And the sewer service will come from the existing lines in